So I thought it might be helpful if I worked a few examples for you from the book. So we're going to start out with y equals the square root of x and look at number 27 that says first shift it up 2 units. So to shift up 2 after the square root, we put a plus 2. Then the next step says to reflect about the x-axis. To make that happen, you multiply the entire function by -1. So do you see how you need the parentheses around the entire function, and then that will cause it to reflect about the x-axis. And then if you wanted to reflect about the y-axis, which is the third step, then you replace x with the opposite of x. So we'll have y equals the opposite of, parentheses, square root of -x, and then plus 2. So let's check and see if this graph does come out to be where we expect it to. So we'd take the basic square root graph and we'd say we want to shift it first by up 2. So here's up 2. Then we want to reflect it about the x-axis. So this would be reflected about the x-axis. And then we want to reflect it about the y-axis. So we'll expect it to be over here. So this is what we're expecting. And let's go check really quick on Desmos and see if that is indeed what we have. So we have y equals the opposite of, open parenthesis, then SQRT is how you get square root on Desmos, the opposite of x, and then outside the parentheses plus 2, and the graph looks exactly how we expected it to. Okay, so let's go back and do some more examples and check the graphs. So we're always starting with y equals the square root of x. So number 28 says, first, reflect about the x-axis. So we said the way to do that is put an opposite in front of the function. There, now it has reflected about the x-axis. Then it says shift right 3 units. So we know that the way to shift right is to go x minus 3 before we do the function of the square root. And then we want to shift down 2 units. So the last thing we're going to do is shift down 2 after the function happens. So here's the square root graph. We want to reflect about the x-axis, so that would give us this graph. Then we want to shift it to the right 3. And then we want to shift that down 2. So this would be where we expect the new graph to be. We expect it to start at 3, -2. So let's go to Desmos and check that out. So we're going to have y equals the opposite of, the square root of, and then inside the square root now x minus 3. And then outside the square root minus 2. And there's the graph, right where we expected it to be at 3, -2. And downward opening instead of the upward opening. Okay, so let's go back and look at another example, number 29. And we're starting with y equals square root of x again. The first thing it says to do is reflect about the x-axis. So reflecting about the x-axis, we say, let's see, we go opposite of the function. There we go, opposite of square root of x. Then if we want to shift it up 2, after we've done the function, we add 2. So we'll have minus the square root of x plus 2. And then if we want to shift it left 3, inside the square root, we have x plus 3. Plus 3 shifts it to the left. So basic square root graph. We want to reflect it about the x-axis. Then we want to bring that up 2. And then we want to shift that to the left 3. So we would expect the graph to start at -3, 2, and be downward opening. So let's go ahead and check that. we'll have y equals the opposite of, now we're going to have x plus 3 inside the square root and plus 2 outside the square root, and there we go. Negative 3, 2 is where the graph starts. So let's do one more example. Number 30, starting with y equals square root of x. And it says first shift it up 2 units. So that's the easy part. Square root of x after the square root plus 2 to shift up to 2. Now it says reflect about the y-axis. Well, we know that the way to do that is to replace x with the opposite of x. And then the last step says shift left 3 units. Now we're going to have to be careful here because the x has already had a multiply by -1 done to it. So we need to take out the effect of the negative before we do the left. So to go to the left, we do plus 3. So we need to do that before we apply the negative. So really these two steps have to be done in the opposite order to get the graph to look like how you expect it to look. So we'll have our basic square root graph. Then we'll go up 2. Then we're going to reflect about the y-axis. And then shift to the left 3 units. So we expect the graph to be over here. So let's go look at Desmos and see what it tells us. So I'm going to have y equals the square root of, inside the square root I'm going to have a negative, and then parentheses, x plus 3, and then after the square root I'm going to have plus 2 to get it to go up 2. So we see that the graph is beginning at negative 3, 2, and the upper half of the parabolic arm. So let me know if you have more questions, and